Right, hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton Theyve. Hello. Should we dial in? Let's dial in.
Yeah.
Here we are. Before we start, obviously, I imagine there was an expectation from our viewers at this point. I've got this. Obviously, here it is. I've not unwrapped it. I've not even unwrapped it. I couldn't bring myself to actually do it. It might take me a while to do that. I made the decision not to review it. It would have to be completely glowing for it to be appropriate. It'd have to be his best ever album. We'd have to agree. So therefore, we decided, well, we can't review it without being critical.
Well,
I don't want to be critical.
initially I thought, let's review it because there'll be a lot of buzz about this album now, and a lot of people will see the review.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not what we do really.
Yeah.
We said before, we don't really go in for trends. We're not doing trendy albums, really.
We don't believe it.
So yeah, I think that's right. I'm sure we'll listen to it at an appropriate time and go with our usual
silly voices
and reviews of David Bowie.
Yeah, and it certainly feels that the reviews we've already done, we've done 5 albums, seem massively inappropriately silly. But maybe that's he had a sense of humour, so it's fine. It's okay. But anyway, we're doing Face the Music. Here it is, Face the Music. That's the cover. It's actually an electric chair. And for years I didn't notice it was an electric chair because I saw them, and on the back it's them pressing their faces against the mirror, watching the execution. But apparently Richard Tandy, the keyboard player, is looking away. And the reason he's looking away is he didn't approve. He didn't think it was a nice cover. He didn't like it, which is interesting. So there you go. So yeah, obviously we're following on from Eldorado. Our journey is through 3 albums, so it's what we're talking about. And this is much more slick. It's more elaborate as well. So the arrangements are much more elaborate as well. I might mention Physical Graffiti a couple of times in this album. It's interesting. This is 1975, and it only occurred to me when I really sat down and thought about it. But there is a parallel with Physical Graffiti in its luscious slickness. It's more elaborate than that. It's only a single album. I'm not saying it's as good as Physical Graffiti, but that's it. I thought that was interesting. The other thing is when you review this album, kind of unlike every other ELO album, you're going to review a song or you're going to review the album as 2 separate things. There's one song that stands out massively and people say, oh yeah, Face the Music, oh yeah, that's Fire on High. Kind of like a Presence kind of thing, or Octavarium, that suffers from that, doesn't it, in the Octavarium, oh yeah, that song. And I think I expected to say it sort of completely overshadows the rest of the album and then it just some songs, which isn't quite true, but I'll talk about that in a bit. There is like a resolve, and it is really nicely structured actually. So yeah, that first song, Fire on High, wonderful structured thing with an instrumental. It sounds familiar like ELO, but at the same time, it's the one that you recognise as prog. It is definitely symphonic rock, and it's definitely elaborate arrangement of stuff going on. It's really good. It's only 5.5 minutes. It made me think of Malmsteen actually, on the few occasions, there aren't many, where he's written big or epic instrumental things. He normally just writes songs. It gets going and then it just, and then it finishes and you think, well, where's the rest of it? It should be twice as long. It's like, I don't know, it's funny that. Yeah, and from in Far and High you get the feeling, it's a lot like Camel, that kind of thing. And you certainly wouldn't have expected that on Eldorado at all. But this is a whole album, and it does, like I said, it's much slicker, it's much more well produced. There's other reasons for it sounding more complete as well, which I'll talk about in a bit, I think. I think it's considered their best album. I agree, and I expected to agree. Well, everyone would expect me to agree, but there's a twist, actually, which we'll talk about next week. Interesting bits of it sound like Queen. And actually, in terms of arrangement, that's a lot like Queen. In that really Queen, it was about their ability to arrange things more than it was about writing songs. And I'm not... I have to choose my words carefully when talking about Queen because obviously they could write songs, but I think it took a lot more effort to think, right, let's write a little song. I think I got the impression for Queen that was a struggle, and they did, obviously, whatever. But I think the best Queen stuff is actually the structured stuff, and this is actually similar to that. But obviously, instead of it sounding like Brian May's guitar, it's strings, and obviously violin isn't that peculiar, but having cellos on rock music, the cellos are playing the riffs and playing all the elaborate stuff in the background, is a unique sound. And in terms of people who say they're influenced by ELO, they never really sound like that. So that's interesting. You can hear that. You could hear a couple of seconds of it, and you will recognise it as ELO, that ELO sound, and that's the moment.
So last Eldorado was a little bit of a meh for me. This album, I definitely agree with you. It's more slick, and it feels a lot more like they're starting to, or they have realised that sort of mission to continue where the Beatles left off. It is very evocative of the Beatles, in places, and not in a jarring, oh, they're just ripping off the Beatles kind of way.
La type stuff.
It's actually sort of, actually that does sound quite Beatlesque, but not intentionally Beatlesque, if you know what I mean.
It's not a million miles from Abbey Road, is it?
No.
Stylistically, I don't mean it's as good. just
Yeah, and what you get out of that is a pretty enjoyable album. It doesn't. Some albums you listen to first time, going, there's plenty to get my teeth into. Yeah, I'm gonna really have a think about it. It doesn't feel like that, but it doesn't. You don't get the sense that I'm gonna get a bit bored of this, a bit jaded, maybe.
Yeah.
You actually think I want to listen to that again because it's an enjoyable experience, but it doesn't feel overly familiar like a pop record can. So a pop record, you can listen to something and think, well, I've heard it a million times before in various guises. It doesn't actually feel like that, although it is sort of evoking the latter sort of run of the Beatles music. So it's good. It's actually given me food for thought. I actually do quite like this album, and I appreciate music with a bigger palette of sounds than you can get with rock. It can become very obviously guitar heavy, but obviously they've got a whole wide range of things that they go for.
Yeah, actually it's that same thing again, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be, and that allows them more complex arrangements. If you just did it all with guitars, it would just be, you've got to have different instruments for different sounds.
Yeah, I mean, when I listened to it first time, I got to One Summer Dream. I was about halfway through, and I had to sort of leave it. And I was quite happy to turn it off, which makes me think it's probably not as considered. Well, obviously not as considered as something like Abbey Road, but it is something you can pull away from in the sense that it doesn't draw you in, and
you can dip into it. And it's got that. Has it got pop value? I don't know about pop value. It's got rock song value in that it's got the value of rock song, but like I said, there's a lot going on at one time.
Yeah.
And that's all about the arrangement, really. And there is a question mark about the auteur question. We know Jeff Lynne's writing the songs, we know he's the guy calling the shots. We also know there's two other people involved in composition. We know Richard Tandy and this other guy who joined on the previous album, Lewis Clark. Lewis Clark wasn't even playing, but he was the arranger, orchestral arranger. And I think it's songs written by Lynne, or arrangements by Lynne, Clark and Tandy. So it's all three of them doing the orchestral arrangement, which is interesting. I think that's a really good idea, rather than just trying to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why it's never jarring, it's never, what was that? And we like, what was that? Sometimes there isn't any of that. It's all smooth and nice, and it's music. It is music to relax to, definitely, isn't it?
Yeah.
But enough to keep your attention. I mean, last week we had our two questions which must be answered. Two questions. Question number one. The first question was about, this is the music I grew up with. Did that influence my taste in music? And whilst with Eldorado, maybe it's a concept album, maybe. Obviously, I mean, the first song sounds like Camel. It's that kind of thing. So yeah, definitely, it is symphonic rock. It's prog. In that it uses a lot of the tropes that are used for prog, with the arrangements and all that stuff. The fact that the songs are catchy, the fact that the songs are challenging, whether that doesn't make it prog or not, but it's good. Yeah. It's almost silly to even answer that question now. So it has some sort of subliminal effect on me. Maybe because I didn't hear it at a very young age, only till I was about 8 years old. Because before that, it was Beatles and lots of ABBA, actually, which I think was good as well. And chart music playing in the background all the time. The second question, in that they've got an image. Well, I said uncool last week. I mean, all the stuff we review is uncool, isn't it? Except for Bowie, of course. And it's not really uncool. It's more that they've got an image of being a bit boring, a bit middle of the road. And from this album, that's obviously not true. They've got all this stuff going on, all the different styles of music, and Fire on High is this structured, wonderful thing, and it's not true. But there is a smoothness to it, and it is easy to listen to, and it's becoming more vocal as well. And one of the reasons for that is on the last tour they changed their bass player singer. I think the bass player singer left because he didn't like touring, but I think there might be more to it than that, because some of the stuff on Eldorado is vocally demanding. I mean, the title track is vocally demanding. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't do it live, or if they did do it live, you won't hear them doing it live, because it's a vocally demanding track. And I think Kelly Grocut, the replacement bass player singer, who was singer first, is a very good singer. He can reach all the stuff, but he's also got a very soft voice. People are quite unkind and say he sounds like Kermit the Frog. And later on, when things get much more vocal, it's all about all these vocal harmonies going on. Once you've been told that, you can't unhear it. It's that, those kind of things. But I think that's one of the reasons it sounds much smoother. And obviously, he's not a rock singer. He a softer voice, which gives it a smoother sound. It's also the production as well. He's got better production as well. But a lot of that is with the vocals, I think. What was your image of ELO before you'd heard them? Because you hadn't heard them, had you? You didn't really know. You knew the symbol and...
Yeah, I think it was... I mean, the thought... Another sort of image that came to my head as I was listening to this, which is probably fed from my prior expectation of what it would be, was actually ELO could have done a bloody good version of Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds.
Because it's not that far from that kind of thing, is it?
And that was actually my prior conception a little bit. It was very sort of keyboardy, I would have said, but not sort of...
Yeah, because which has been arranged for strings. It could be played on keyboard. It could, probably written on keyboard, or most of it. Little bits written on guitar, but quite obviously most of it written on keyboard.
I get a similar sort of vibe to Rush, in the sense that Rush have got a massive following, very theatrical, but not quite at the forefront, if you know what I mean. Although Jeff Lynne is a massive figure in the music industry,
yes,
ELO are considered an important band, but actually they're just sort of pushing at the mainstream of being sort of like David Bowie-esque, if you know what I mean. There's just certain figures that are genre defining and music defining, and they don't feel particularly defining. They feel sort of like playing around in a certain area of music and not really pushing the boundaries.
Really, this is where they found that thing. That's the thing, and now the only thing to do now is go more commercial.
Yeah.
Or not.
But I mean, apart from your parents, do you know any hardcore ELO fans?
No. They definitely exist on the internet, but not personally, no. That's interesting.
It is kind of
I mean, we did go from hippies on drugs to Birmingham. That was the journey we've made.
Yeah.
Is there a Brummie thing again? We talked about this with Sabbath.
Yeah.
Why isn't Tony Iommi recognised? He's recognised as a riff writer. Why isn't he recognised as a fantastic player with a fantastic tone and all that? And is it a Brummie thing?
It could be a Brummie thing. There's another thing as well. You know, when you hear, on Top Gear when Jeremy Clarkson playing Genesis in the car, it was a little bit surprising, and then it was like, oh, actually, no, that makes sense. I've never known anyone sort of say, oh yeah, I like ELO, and thought, oh, that's surprising. Because there's a sort of sense that it's kind of...
I can't think of anyone. Because it's just that it's some... Yeah, and that's a coolness factor. That's possibly because they went so commercial. Like a bit like Genesis. I don't know whether I've met anyone who likes Genesis, actually. When I say I like Genesis, people are sort of, you like Genesis? Because in their mind it flashes Invisible Touch. Yeah. And a bald man whining.
But yeah, with regards to the Birmingham thing, I definitely think there is a Birmingham factor to it. I mean, if Jimmy Page wasn't from Birmingham, if he was, would Led Zeppelin be so critically acclaimed?
I mean, actually, because Page went to a lot of parties with the Stones when he got a bit out of control, and supposedly they were making fun of him because half of Led Zeppelin were a couple of Ernies from Birmingham. That's what they said. This is the Stones. So, I mean, the Stones are funny as well, so, a bit like Brummies.
Yeah.
Or are they pirates? So, we start to get more famous songs now, and it'll be interesting to see whether you know the other very famous songs. We won't get that far into them, but I bet you know Mr. Blue Sky. You won't know the name, but you'll recognise the song.
Right.
And Don't Bring Me Down, and blah, blah, blah. But here we have Evil Woman, which is a proper famous song that people know. The first one, anyway. But it's still on the side of... Evil Woman is acceptable to rock people, whereas Don't Bring Me Down would be kind of that's disco. loud. So in my youth, when it had to be rock, Evil Woman would be acceptable, and that wouldn't. And that's the song that Black Sabbath may have played, but actually probably didn't. Interestingly, when in the 80s, when Bev Bevan joined Black Sabbath because Bill Ward was drunk again, the rumour was, because they played Smoke on the Water, so the rumour was, because it was like a supergroup, well, are they playing Evil Woman? Did they play Evil Woman? Can we find a tape when they did play it at this concert? And it's kind of been very unlikely. They might have played it as a joke in a rehearsal, just trying to remember the chords and not being able to remember it, kind of thing. But they didn't actually play it, and Ian Gillan did not sing Evil Woman. Can you imagine what that would have sounded like? Him screaming the chorus, Evil Woman! And yet, Evil Woman, it's so smooth, and with the funky guitar, which isn't a million miles from, well, a couple of weeks ago I made an 8-bit version of a Daft Punk song, for whatever reason, who knows why I would do that. But the guitar on that isn't a million miles, the funky guitar, isn't a million miles from Evil Woman, so it's interesting, isn't it, how it was easy for them to go in that direction. And about what's cool and what isn't is pretty superficial, really. Poker's quite an interesting song. There's this descend. Well, you've got this harmonised vocals quite high, and it's actually Kelly Groker is the lead vocalist, with Jeff Lynne is behind him in the vocals, which is interesting. But there's this descending riff, really Zeppelin-esque. Remember, this is 1975. And even the sound of the guitar as well, very, very Pagey. So that's really cool. And like I said, in my mind, you had Fahrenheit and then some songs, and it just sort of carried on with some songs and it ended. But it's only listening to it properly I realised about One Summer Dream, which is really good, is actually a resolution of the melody from Waterfall. So it does fit together as an album really well. And I think, Down Home Town, which is kind of like, what do you call it, a Dixie song, South Central America, so I don't know what that is, but it's going in such a completely different direction, but it does resolve at the end with a really good piece. That's interesting. The second single was Strange Magic, which they still play. I believe the two songs they play from this album are going to be Evil Woman and Strange Magic. I know they're definitely playing Strange Magic. I don't like Strange Magic, it's boring. And it's interesting, is that because I just remember hearing it and I'm bored of it? Or is it just a boring song? I don't know. But it was the second single. I think next week we'll talk about band members and who is a band member and who isn't a band member and why is he a band member. But we'll say that for next week. Eggs. Ooh. Eggs. Ooh. 5 eggs for me. It's easy. It's not 6 eggs, it's not 4 eggs, it's definitely 5 eggs.
It's a 4-egger for me. I'm not so big on the ELO, but I definitely want to listen to it again. So it's definitely above average, which should be 3 eggs. And it's better than definitely better than Eldorado. So I'm going to give it 4 eggs, but I'm not sort of like committed enough to it to give it 5.
Yeah. Cool. Right, that was Face the Music.
Yay!
We'll see you next week for a New World Record. That will be our last one. So, there's another album after that, Out of the Blue, which is also good. It's a double. So we're certainly not going any further. Don't ask us to go any further, we'll do something different after that. So yeah, see you next week!